The world is known for having very dark historical events, from the enslavement of Africans during the slave trade to the mass genocide of the Jewish people in the Holocaust. Even though these events are common knowledge among everyone, there are still many events that not a lot of people know about. The Guatemalan Syphilis Experiment is another US funded experiment, just like Tuskegee, where this time it will be over 5,000 Guatemalan people who would be the victims. The study lasted from 1946 to 1948, being much shorter than the Tuskegee experiment, but even though it was shorter, it was still really brutal. Honestly, I would say it was way more brutal than what happened in Tuskegee. The study was titled Experimental Studies on Human Inoculation in Syphilis, Gonorrhea, and Chancroid. According to the American Journal of Public Health, the study involved at least 5,128 vulnerable people, including children, orphans, child and adult prostitutes, Guatemalan Indians, leprosy patients, mental patients, prisoners, and soldiers. The US government taxed medical researchers to find ways to prevent contraction of STDs, or sexually transmitted diseases, among US soldiers. Now, you're probably wondering, why did they need this? Well, soldiers back then, they were known for hooking up with prostitutes and getting an STD, so much so that the US government even stated that this was one of the most pressing issues in military medicine. So yeah, this finding a cure and treatment for STDs was really important back then. But they really didn't need this experiment. So anyway, during this time, it was actually during the beginning of World War II, where you know who was trying to take over the world with his little Nazis. In the 1940s, penicillin was discovered to be an effective way of treating syphilis days within an infection. After this discovery, the military began using penicillin as a post-STD treatment, but they didn't know whether or not penicillin provided as a long-term treatment for STDs. The military wanted to test other drugs like orvismarfarsin to see if they provided any treatment for STDs, especially because penicillin at the time was really expensive. The experiment originally didn't begin in Guatemala. It actually began in the Terre Haute prison in Indiana. And it was led by a senior surgeon at the PHS named John Cutler. A physician from Guatemalan Ministry of Public Health named Juan Jones met Cutler in New York and suggested to him that the study should be conducted in Guatemala City because prostitution was legal there. I just realized I never explained why they needed prostitutes in the first place. So basically, originally they tried using syringes to inject syphilis into the patients, but it wasn't consistent at all. So the whole situation ended up being a bust, and the only way they could get consistent results was through like the natural way, aka, yeah. So that's why they needed prostitutes and sex workers. Okay, cool. Hope that out. John Cutler was a very sly and cunning man. Like, when they moved to Guatemala, he even started a treatment program in order to gain the trust of the Guatemalan public health leaders before actually starting the experiment. So yeah, not the best person. In November 1946, Cutler and his team started doing serology experiment on Guatemalan prisoners, children, psychiatric patients, and leprosy patients. They supposedly conducted these serologies to accurately diagnose syphilis, so they know what to look for when they actually began the actual experiment. According to the Wiley Online Library, none of the records indicate that the researchers requested consent from the adult subjects or assent from the children to participate in these experiments. The directors and leaders of the Guatemalan institutions granted access to these vulnerable populations. PHS researchers also conducted serology studies with over 1,000 Guatemalan children from the National Orphanage, school children in the port of San Jose, and children from indigenous communities in the highlands. The serology experiments with children were ostensibly to distinguish congenital syphilis from syphilis that had been acquired sexually. The children were subjected to physical examination, venipuncture, and even lower back punctures. Marta Orellana was a woman born with syphilis who at the time lived at an orphanage because she was an orphan, and she was told that she had bad blood. And because she was an orphan at the time and she had syphilis, she ended up becoming a victim to this whole experiment. Here's her describing her horrible experience while being in the experiment.
10-year-old Marta Orellana says her nightmare began.
Y me acostaron en una camilla. Entonces un doctor estaba de este lado y el otro, y la enfermera me tenía agarrada la cabeza. Entonces ellos hicieron por abrirme las piernas, ¿verdad? Y yo no quería. Entonces yo como niña de 10 años con sus fuerzas que podía tener, ¿verdad? Yo no quería y no quería, y yo hacía lo posible porque no. Entonces ellos decían, no se puede, no se puede.
She says the director, Dr. Corfino, hit her in the face to get her cooperation.
Entonces ellos empezaron, no sé si eran gasas o algodones, no sé, pero ellos me abrieron las piernas y me hicieron ese examen en mis partes, pues, y me metían los dedos con algodón y iba de meterlos y los ponían en una cajita que ellos tenían hacia un lado y yo lloraba pues porque una niña pues me dolía, ¿no? Entonces ahí fue donde me pusieron con la cabeza hasta los pies, me doblaron y me sacaron el líquido de la columna. Entonces yo sí, cuando ellos me sacaron la aguja, yo curiosa como niña, ¿verdad? Volteé a ver así y así fue el poco de que me sacaron de la columna.
Yeah, that video is very hard to watch. Literally, when I first watched it, my blood was boiling. I was so angry. And it's the fact that these researchers really did not care because they weren't white. Literally, just because they weren't white, they just thought, oh, it's okay to exploit these people because they're in a different country and they were poor. So they were easy victims of this horrible crime. After the serology test, John Cutler and his team exposed 1,300 sex workers, soldiers, and psychiatric patients with syphilis. It was even stated that the sex workers were compensated for this experiment with U.S. taxpayer dollars. And at this point, it can't get any worse, literally. Well, it does, because I know what happens at the end. It gets worse, but the fact that they use U.S. taxpayer dollars to pay for this whole experiment and exploiting these Guatemalan people, it's just... We love the government, don't we? 83 Guatemalan people ended up dying in the experiment because syphilis is not this painless disease. Like, I even showed you guys in the last video all the horrible things that comes with syphilis. Like, we're just lucky that we're in an era where syphilis is so easily treatable. A quote in the American Journal of Public Health describes the death of a woman named Berta, and the death is just really gruesome. So I already gave you a warning in the beginning, but here. Berta was a female patient in the psychiatric hospital. Her age and the illness that brought her to the hospital was unknown. In February 1948, Berta was injected in her left arm with syphilis. A month later, she developed scabies, an itchy skin infection caused by a mite. Several weeks later, lead investigator Dr. John Cutler noted that she had also developed red bumps where he had injected her arm, lesions on her arms and legs, and her skin was beginning to waste away from her body. Berta was not treated for syphilis until 3 months after her injection. Soon after, on August 23rd, Dr. Cutler wrote that Berta appeared as if she was going to die, but he did not specify why. That same day, he put gonorrheal pus from another male subject into both of Berta's eyes, as well as in her urethra and rectum. He also reinfected her with syphilis. Several days later, Berta's eyes were filled with pus from gonorrhea, and she was bleeding from her urethra. On August 27th, Berta died. Reading that out loud was not fun whatsoever. Probably one of the most depressing things I've done. And this was all for the military. Okay, it's not a bad thing that they wanted to find like an alternative solution to penicillin. And it's not a bad thing they wanted to treat STDs in the military soldiers. It's the fact that they chose Guatemalan people who were poor and vulnerable. Like, they couldn't do anything. They literally forced them. They didn't tell them about the research. It was just like Tuskegee. Nobody knew what was happening. They just did it. And they just didn't give a fuck. Like, that's all I can say. They just didn't give a fuck. They're literally. Honestly, I wish there was a happy ending to this story, because everything is just so depressing. But no, there's not. Like, literally, John Cutler, the face of the whole freaking operation, he literally just left Guatemala like nothing happened, and then he helped start the Tuskegee institution, where he just continued to do the same thing. The difference is he didn't purposely infect anyone. That's the only difference. He had the decency to find people already with syphilis. Wow, so great, so nice, so stupid. What? If you watch the Tuskegee video, you already know that none of them got convicted. There wasn't a single person that got convicted of these crimes. And that's the thing that aggravates me the most. Especially the fact that John Cutler, because everybody knows he did it, he didn't get convicted at all. Not for Guatemala, not for Tuskegee. He was scot-free, died at a peaceful age of 87, living his best life. So great. Such a great surgeon. Like, literally, the Hippocratic Oath doesn't mean anything at this point. When it comes to people of color.
What is that? What?
Literally, nobody got any justice. Like, the only thing they really got was an apology from the president, Barack Obama. Like, I'm not hating on Barack, but like, an apology. What's that gonna do? Wow. Public. They did the same thing with Tuskegee. Bill Clinton made an apology. Wow. So great. Like, put a little money. Well, actually, the Guatemalans didn't get any money, so let me not say that. Only the people in Tuskegee got money. And that was only because a whole bunch of organizations had to basically force the government to give money to them. So, great job, government, yet again. And for those who are probably like, oh,
why did the Guatemalan try to sue the government?
They did. They literally, there was a class action lawsuit. Like, they tried to sue the government, but literally they lost due to technicality. And the technicality is, there's a thing in the government that's still enacted to this day called sovereign immunity. And I'm going to simplify it to the T, because this is literally what it is. Basically, you can't sue the government unless the government gives consent. How does that make sense? How does that make sense? You can't sue the government unless it gives consent. Literally, how does that make any sense? Hmm? Can somebody explain it to me? Maybe I'm not connecting the dots in my head. Because can I have that? I want that. I don't want anybody to sue me unless I give consent. Like, even if I'm morally wrong. Like, they got nothing. Like, all they lost based on technicality. Huh. Some dumb things in this world. So yeah, like I said, not a happy ending. There was no happy ending to this whole thing. Like, Tuskegee, it was just unsatisfying. That's how I would describe that ending. Tuskegee, unsatisfying. At least they were compensated, but nobody got convicted. This one, the Guatemalan experiment, this is just I can't even describe it in words. It's just aggravating. That's the best word. Because all these people died. All these people got contracted with the diseases. And their family, because syphilis doesn't just stop at one person. It spreads. It spreads not only through sexual contact, obviously, but it also is genetic. It can be genetic and be passed down to children. So all these families that have syphilis because of this experiment are not even compensated for it. So, yeah. But yeah, that's the historical event of the Guatemalan Syphilis Experiment. And if you want me to talk about more topics and historical events like these, and even though they're dark and high-key messed up, but me personally, I think it's important to like know about this stuff because nobody else is gonna really tell you at all. You gotta look for it, but it's kind of hard to look for it when you don't know what to look for, you know? So yeah, if you want me to continue this, I will. I mean, I feel like I'm gonna continue this anyways. Like, I feel like it's kind of dumb for me not to continue stuff like this, but hey, please like and subscribe so more videos like this can be shown on YouTube, so the message spreads more. And yeah, stay woke.